everybody. Welcome to Cup of Jonah. It's still very cold here. Surprisingly, in North Georgia, it doesn't get down below 10 degrees very often, but it is. Not 10 below 10. Many of you may know remember I grew up in Chicago, so I'm used to temperatures much colder than this during the winter. But it's different in the South. They don't maintain the roads the same way because they don't have the need, right? So it's very different. But it is what it is. This cold ice storm will pass soon. Today we move into chapter 7. We had a great question from Amy yesterday about whether or not, after we discussed whether or not some truths are above reason, and whether or not it's foolishness to believe those truths that are revealed that go beyond our natural capacity. And obviously, as we visited yesterday, the answer is yes. It's not foolishness. It is reasonable to believe those things. And then surprisingly, he went in against the Mohammedans a bit there. But it begged the question, quite literally. Well, is there actually any contradiction, or is there continuity to the truths of reason and the truths of that beyond reason that are revealed by the faith? Good morning, Amy. Good morning, Templar. So, very interesting. So here we go. I have a neat story I want to tell you guys after this as well. Chapter 7, that the truth of reason is not opposed to the truth of the Christian faith. Now, although the truth of the Christian faith, which we have discussed, surpasses the capacity of the reason, nevertheless, that truth that the human reason is naturally endowed to know cannot be opposed to the truth of the Christian faith. For that with which the human reason is naturally endowed is clearly most true, so much so that it is impossible for us to think of such truths as false, nor is it permissible to believe as false that which we hold by faith, since this is confirmed in a way that is so clearly divine. Since, therefore, only the false is opposed to the true, it is clearly evident from an examination of their definitions, it is impossible that the truths of faith should be opposed to the principles that the human reason knows naturally. Side note, before we continue, this is a me comment, this is not Thomas, is that kind of the implication is also that that's a good litmus test for anything that we're being told is revealed truth. If it goes against human reason, then that's not a faith precept that I want to subscribe to. Like, for example, I'm supposed to believe by faith that there was a Big Bang or that we came from monkeys. That's not a faith I want to subscribe to. I digress. Furthermore, that which is introduced into the soul of the student by the teacher is contained in the knowledge of the teacher, unless his teaching is fictitious, which it is improper to say of God. Now, the knowledge of the principles that are known to us naturally has been implanted in us by God, for God is the author of our nature. These principles, therefore, are also contained by the divine wisdom. Hence, whatever is opposed to them is opposed to divine wisdom, and therefore cannot come from God. That which we hold by faith as divinely revealed, therefore, cannot be contrary to our natural knowledge. Again, in the presence of contrary arguments, our intellect is chained, so that it cannot proceed to the knowledge of the truth. If, therefore, contrary knowledges were implanted in us by God, our intellect would be hindered from knowing truth by this very fact. Now, such an effect cannot come from God. Again, what is natural cannot change as long as nature does not. Let me read that again. Again, what is natural cannot change as long as nature does not. Now, it is impossible that contrary opinions should exist in the same knowing subject at the same time. No opinion or belief, therefore, is implanted in man by God, which is contrary to man's natural knowledge. Therefore, the apostle says, quote, "The word is nigh thee, even in thy mouth and in thy heart. This is the word of faith which we preach." End quote. Romans. But because it overcomes reason, there are some who thinks that it is opposed to it, which is impossible. The authority of St. Augustine also agrees with this. He writes as follows, quote, "That which truth will reveal cannot in any way be opposed to the sacred books of the Old and New Testament." End quote. From this, we evidently gather the following conclusion. Whatever arguments are brought forward against the doctrines of faith are conclusions incorrectly derived from the first and self-evident principles embedded in nature. Such conclusions do not have the force of demonstration. They are arguments that are either probable or sophistical, and so there exists the possibility to answer them. So it's interesting because, again, remember the context we're talking about. He's saying, let's talk about all these truths from the perspective of reason, right? So here he's kind of indirectly, and he kind of ties it up in a bow at the end there a little bit. He's kind of basically saying, look, there is continuity between, because our intellects, he didn't use these words exactly, but I'm paraphrasing. Since our intellects are participation in the divine intellect, that's where we get the light of our knowledge and intellects is from him. Well, then, how could anything that's revealed by God contradict the very principles that God gave us, or that we are in our mind because we're participating in his mind? If that makes sense. So it's like it doesn't make any sense. So he not only says that, okay, well, if something clearly contradicts reason, as I suggested, then it's not worthy of belief. But the opposite is also true, that once you've determined which source is actually conveying revelation, what body of truth, or once you've discovered revelation, so to speak, and figured out where that revelation is coming from God to us, then the contrary is also true. In other words, if we hear an argument, or ourselves are trying to think through something, and the conclusion we come to contradicts what we know to have been revealed, precisely because of the nature of that revelation, etc., then we do well to question and challenge, or question the conclusions that we've arrived at. Now, this isn't saying if there's solid reason, even if the reasoning is solid. No, he says, well, that's actually an indication of a sophistical argument, or just a probable argument. So there's nothing certain, nothing scientifically demonstrated. Okay, interesting. So just like I think we talked about earlier, the higher sciences, in chapter 1, if you remember, the higher sciences can judge the lower sciences. The master artisans are able to use, and they're the ones who kind of dictate the end and the purpose of the lower sciences, right? So here, at a grander scale now, we can see, all right, so just as the doctor uses medicine, or rather, medicine uses the chemist to help him heal or combat sickness, because it's the higher science, it understands what it's trying to accomplish, right? Like for example, in this case, inflammation is good in the body. It's a natural process to heal, natural part of the healing process. Sometimes that can be a sign of disease. So we're in one case, the medic knows that he needs to reduce inflammation in this subject, in this patient. the chemist wouldn't necessarily know whether to reduce or increase or let inflammation persist in this patient, right? So the idea is just like applied physics we talked about. If you come in your math and you're trying to calculate the speed of an object hitting the ground, and you after being dropped from a certain height, and you come up with a negative number, we know that that's not possible. You must have forgotten a parenthesis somewhere, or there must have been an error in the calculation. So we can judge and rule out that answer as being valid and direct the mathematician to go back and check again, because we know that that answer cannot be. It's a similar parallel here, that reasoning through complex notions and higher notions of philosophy are much more difficult than mathematics, but they too can be judged only by a higher science. So metaphysics or theology, these, when taken as a scientific thing, and revelation, when taken scientifically, which actually, if you remember in my introduction, the Summa Theologica is actually the same body of truths, but from the top down, so to speak, from the perspective of and arguing from revelation, but still very, very rigorous and scientific. So it's not like hokey, right? Or imaginary. It's very rigorous and scientific. But anyways, so that higher science of theology, quote unquote, when taken as a science, has the right and the capacity to judge the philosophical conclusion and say, no, look again. And it's not saying, oh, discard logic. No. Double check your math. Double check your logic. Double check your argument. Because that's not a reasonable conclusion. That conclusion doesn't fit with everything else in nature that falls in line with this understanding of God, if that makes sense. So it's very continuous. It's very refreshing. Thomas is very refreshing in how soberly he considers everything and how tranquilly he reflects upon everything. It's really beautiful. When reading this, I was reminded of, as you know, the concepts of Aristotle are drawn on a lot by Thomas, which is why I draw on him a lot. I've spent a lot of time studying the man. I think he's one of the most beautiful men, most beautiful minds to have ever walked this earth. So you guys know in the Old Testament, it's one of my favorite stories about Aristotle. So you know in the Old Testament, there was one book in the Old Testament that wasn't written by the chosen people, wasn't written by the Israelites. The book of Job. Job was a just pagan. Job went through all this pain and suffering and never ever denied his God. Okay. So obviously Aristotle was a pagan, we know that. So how cool is this? Aristotle, whose final book in the Metaphysics talks about that God is all-knowing, all good, and his providence extends to the most minute detail, and he is as a father, he even calls him a father, he cares for his creation, down to the smallest of creatures, because he can and he's good. That's what Aristotle believed. That's what Aristotle understood. Aristotle asked to be buried when he died, holding a golden medallion on his breast that said, it quoted the book of Job and said, "For I know that in my flesh I shall see God." Amazing. So it wasn't just an academic study for him. He knew just by reason alone that God was a loving father and that God loved him. It's amazing. It's amazing. So with that, I think I'll leave you, unless there's any questions. I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts. Yeah, it's Amy. It's really interesting. It's a very hard to find fact. I learned it from a teacher of mine who had studied patristics. So like the old Greek, not patristics. Yeah, no patristics, but a lot of the early church fathers and things, and the classics. That's it, the patristics and the classics. But so he studied a lot of these guys and biographers of these greats in their original language, so the Greek and the Latin originals. And he was the one who told me that he read it in one of the old Greek biographies of Aristotle. So pretty amazing. Yeah. So very inspiring. And it also shows that, yeah, okay, fine. Well, we look at all of this, the concept of revelation, the concept that implies a religion, And what's interesting is we also have to be careful that God doesn't confine himself to working within and exclusively within the apparatus that he's set up for us to lead us to or to reveal to us more truth. He moves where he will. Even when there was literally everybody outside of the Jewish people they were either being slaughtered or conquered or whatever, right? Well, even in that situation where it was very different and there was a lot of, the chosen people was very much in their theology that nobody outside of them was saved. Well, what about Job? He actually has a book in Scripture. It's pretty neat. Amy says, imagine if we had the ability to talk to such souls like Aristotle. I know. It's so funny. Yeah, him and Thomas. Like if I could have dinner with either of them or both of them, holy smokes, I know as a Christian, I'm supposed to say, and I probably would. I'm supposed to say I'd love to sit down with Christ, but I don't know. I mean, obviously, duh, right? Because he's our Lord. But at the same time, it's like, it's almost, I don't know. It's not that it's unrelatable, and it would be wonderful. I mean, don't get me wrong, or one of the apostles, or Our Lady, or yeah, obviously, I'm not trying to. But more like from a purely academic standpoint, I don't know. There's something just really beautiful about those two minds, Aristotle and Thomas. And they say that Aristotle was only really truly understood by his actual students. So he intentionally wrote a little bit more obscurely and cryptically so that you had to actually be in his classes or in his, you had to actually be tutored by him to understand what he was trying to say, essentially, because he wrote very succinctly. Thomas, though, he actually said, I mean, he had photographic memory because he quotes, I mean, all these quotes, he quotes word for word, character for character, accurately, all these medieval authors, both ones that he agreed with and disagreed with. And at one point he was like, yeah, I've never read anything that I subsequently forgot. Must be nice. So anyways, yeah, beautiful minds. Possibly not the best conversationalist though. Who knows? I don't know, but it is a neat thought. But the perspectives would be really beautiful to hear their perspectives on things. So yes, Amy, yes, feels like aiming too high. Yes, in some sense, yes, but also at the same time. So someone told me once, and this will always stay with me, that our Lord came and died for us on the cross in order to show us how vigorously and how the extent of his love for us. But he came as a little babe in a manger, vulnerable, approachable, cuddleable, because of how much he wants us to feel invited to come up and approach him, and how much he wants our love in return. So, is it aiming too high? Even there, just to kind of tie it back to what we were saying earlier about God not restricting himself to the own apparatus he sets up for us or the tools he gives us. Even in the case of his birth, the wise men from the east who were not Jewish, Zoroastrian allegedly, they followed the stars and found him to give homage. It's yet another indication that yes, we can study, we can talk about, we can try to understand how God normally reveals himself and how God normally reveals truth to us, and the apparatus, so to speak, that he set up in order to convey that truth to us more reliably. But that's not to say that he's confined to it. So it's beautiful. Well, tomorrow we're almost through what you could call the introduction section, because now, after saying, okay, now we've recognized this continuity, we started last week, the beginning of the book, saying, all right, well, what's the purpose of this book? What is wisdom? What's the purpose of this book? How does knowledge work? Is there continuity? Should anything be revealed? Okay. If things can be revealed, is it foolishness to believe something we can't fully understand? Now that we've resolved that, it was important to look, okay, well, can there be contradiction between revealed truth and naturally undiscoverable truth? And then now, tomorrow, we'll talk about it. Tomorrow is about how human reason is related to the truth of faith. Then the last chapter, day after tomorrow, in this little preamble section, you could call it, is he talks about the order and manner of procedure in the present work. Remember, we talked about how the primary office of the teacher, the twofold office of the teacher, is to impart new knowledge, to give new knowledge and information. That's the standard understanding of teacher. But also to order the knowledge we already have in our minds. So that's what chapter 9 is going to be about. It's going to be a little bit of a reveal of that, of why he orders that. It's going to explain the order to follow of all the truths. And then we get in with chapter 10. That's Friday. We get into the truths themselves. Now we'll actually ask the first question about God. Just to tease you, the opinion of those who say that the existence of God, being self-evident, cannot be demonstrated. So, I love it. Amy, thank you. I love that you guys hang out with me in the morning here and reflect on these beautiful truths with me. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me today for a cup of Jonah. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. See you tomorrow for our penultimate chapter in the preamble, where we are looking at the order of the things to follow. Have a great rest of your day.